Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, December the 5th, 2025. So I'm hoping that today is the last day with my old computer. If you've been a regular watcher of my videos, you'll know that there's quite a lot of computer noise here, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to make the transfer today, and so I'm hoping that in my next recording we will have electronic quiet. As far as what I want to talk about today, well, there is at the moment an opposition aspect between the Moon and Mars, and Saturn is on the T. So we've got Saturn, Moon, and Mars coming together. You've got Moon in Gemini, opposition Mars in Sagittarius, and then you've got Saturn on the T, and that also means that the Moon is making a sesquiquadrate to the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, what does that actually mean? And I think that in this video I will be looking at Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, looking at a few examples of people and events with this midpoint. I know that sounds really obscure, but I like to remind myself and those watching this video that midpoints do matter, and they might say something about the personality, and they might also say something about the quality of a particular event. So before I look at the Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint in detail, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today. So here is the chart for today, set for noon New York time on Friday, December the 5th, 2025. And don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So you can see in this chart that the Moon is at 24 degrees Gemini at noon New York time. So we can say the usual stuff about the Moon in Gemini. It can be quite talkative. You have to ask, why does Gemini talk a lot? Is it just because Moon in Gemini wants to be friendly, or is Moon in Gemini trying to defend itself? I mean, the Moon is quite a responsive planet. It responds to outside events. It is the tide, and the question is, how does the Moon respond? And when it's in Gemini, just the easiest way to respond might be just to talk. Say the first thing that comes to mind. Just keep the conversation going, and in that way you might perhaps avoid the important matters, the things you don't really want to talk about. At least that's one interpretation of the Moon in Gemini. And at the moment, we've just had a full moon. So we had a full moon on Thursday, even Friday morning, depending on your time zone, to this morning on your time zone. And having had that full moon, the Moon is still in opposite signs to the Sun. So the influence of this full moon, the immediate influence, is still very much with us. And we're perhaps aware that things are becoming clear. It is maybe a big reveal. We perhaps are able to see what's really going on for the first time, and there may be a sense that we're understanding the truth of the matter. It's always good to know the truth of the matter, but sometimes it can be distressing, can be disturbing. And the Moon, having made the opposition with the Sun, because that's the definition of a full moon, it's moving on to an opposition of Mars. So Moon opposition Mars is potentially quite a difficult aspect. It's quite an angry aspect. There are things that might annoy us, and there may be moments of frustration. How do we express this frustration? I mean, maybe verbally. That's one way of doing it with the Moon in Gemini. If we're confused, we don't know what to do, we feel annoyed, we feel angry, well, maybe we can say something. If we don't say something, there could be a certain amount of nervous tension with that Moon opposition Mars. And then the Moon, having made that opposition to Mars, makes a square to Saturn. And this reminds us that Mars is starting to move towards a square to Saturn. And in the sort of early mid-December, that Mars square Saturn is one of the most important aspects going on. It may define the middle of December, and I did a video quite recently when I did a brief preview of December, and that Mars-Saturn square really dominates proceedings, and I will certainly be talking a lot more about that Mars-Saturn square. But today, with the moon picking up on that Mars-Saturn square, we're perhaps getting the first evidence that this Mars square Saturn is in operation. And I think it really could be quite a difficult influence. It's not just the fact that the moon is opposition Mars, or just the fact that the moon is square Saturn. It's the fact that it's happening together. And yeah, you do have a T-square. So you've got moon opposition, where you've got moon opposition Mars, and moon opposition Mars. It's quite an angry combination, and if we try to put it together, we have Saturn on the T, and so Saturn is asking us to perhaps be more disciplined. We somehow have to control our feelings. That doesn't mean suppress our feelings. Now, as far as the topic of this video, I really wanted to focus, well, at least at the end of this video, I wanted to focus on the fact that the moon is sesquiquadrate the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So there is the moon, it's making up, there's the Mars-Saturn midpoint at around, I don't know, 10, 8, about 8 Aquarius, something like that, 8, 9 Aquarius, and the moon is sesquiquadrate that. And so, using the 45 degrees series of midpoints, that is a valid aspect, and so that's why I'm going to be looking at moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint in detail. Now, the moon does move into Gemini this evening if you're in the Americas. So London time on Saturday, moon moves, sorry, did I say Gemini? I meant Cancer. So London time, the moon moves into Cancer at 1:54 a.m. on Saturday morning. So that means if you are in the Americas, then then this evening, moon moves out of Gemini into Cancer, and moon moving into Cancer, it might not be such a bad thing. The moon moving into Cancer, because the immediate influence of the full moon is over, and some of the tension of that moon opposition Mars, moon square Saturn will die down, and perhaps it'll be easier to relax once the moon moves into Cancer this evening if you're in the Americas. If you're not in the Americas, then you're going to have the moon in Gemini all day long. So that's the view from the perspective of New York. For December the 5th, 2025. If we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, here it is at noon as a representative of Australia and New Zealand. And well, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, you're really feeling the full moon. I mean, that's what the day is all about. So you could say that some of what I said about the full moon yesterday, applies to today, and so it's very much a full moon day. I don't think you need to worry so much about moon opposition Mars or moon square Saturn. I'm afraid that will potentially be a feature of tomorrow more. And so with the full moon, the normal things that have to be said about the full moon, you can see the full moon in the sky if it's not cloudy and it's dark, and you'll get a sense of something finally manifesting, something becoming obvious. And I mean, you don't have to necessarily accept the truth, but the truth is available to you. And of course, this full moon is square the nodal axis, so it's something of an anti-eclipse, because on the eclipse is the nodal axis and the full moon are conjunct each other, but here now they're square, and so it is an anti-eclipse. I haven't quite worked out what an anti-eclipse means, because it's as far away from an eclipse as you can possibly be. So far away that it actually has the qualities of an eclipse. That's the way it always works. If you get too negative, it becomes positive again. I'm not saying it is an eclipse. I'm just saying it might have the quality of an eclipse, something becoming obvious, something really manifesting, and it cannot be denied. But if you're open to the truth, I think you're in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, then I think it can be quite a good day. And moving to the heliocentric view, here it is, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. That is not the heliocentric view, even though let me just switch the setting. Let's switch the coordinates. There we go. So there's the heliocentric picture. Saturn and Neptune are now getting really close to each other heliocentrically. Now only 10 arc minutes away. So the uncertainty of that heliocentric Saturn-Neptune conjunction is perhaps becoming sort of clearer and clearer. Which way are things going? How to what extent should we be afraid? And we would like to let go. We'd like to sort of not be on our guard all the time, but we kind of have to be on our guard all the time. Particularly when we look at what's happening in the world. The concerns about the economy, concerns about global stability, what's going on in Venezuela. How's that? If Trump goes piling into Venezuela, how's that going to impact everything else? I don't know. It might not be too good. And so, as far as other things are concerned, Mercury is square Uranus. So heliocentric Mercury is square at 29 Leo, square Uranus at 29 Taurus. So when you've got a geocentric Mercury square Uranus, it's a more unusual aspect. When you're dealing with a heliocentric Mercury square Uranus, well, remember that Mercury only takes 88 days to go around the Sun. So Mercury square Uranus is something that happens relatively frequently. But still, when it happens, we should take note of it. And Mercury square Uranus is quite tense. We feel we want something to happen, but we don't quite know how to fully express ourselves. And so something might be kind of holding us back because we're thinking, well, what would happen if? But then, can we really help ourselves? And so with Mercury square Uranus, there might be news, things to distract us, and overall there is an air of tension when if we think about the geocentric picture, we've got Moon opposition Mars, which puts a lot of us on edge. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, you've got a full moon. Still, a full moon can be pretty edgy, and so that's Mercury square Uranus, and I think it's a relatively minor influence, but it just makes the day, just that much more tense, difficult. I don't think it's necessarily difficult. I mean, you could argue that we've got a T-square actually, because Venus is starting to make an opposition to Uranus, so maybe you can see this as a wider configuration there. And so with Venus sort of in that position, it just tells us that as the weekend progresses, as we move into the weekend, the overall environment could be quite nervous, and perhaps things can't always be relied on. Maybe people can't always be relied on. They might make promises, but something might crop up and they have to change their plans. So that could be a way in which this aspect, or this set of aspects, works. And now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, December the 5th, 2025. Aries. I mentioned, in the introduction to this video that Mars is starting to make a square aspect to Saturn. You can see that Mars is at 22, 23 Sagittarius, moving to a square of Saturn at 25 Pisces, and this may have an influence on you. And when you're dealing with Mars square Saturn, we may be talking about, a degree of frustration. There are things you would like to be doing and maybe you feel you can't. You'd like to reach out. You'd like to sort of move beyond your sort of everyday boundaries, do something different, do something exciting. But maybe you're increasingly feeling that something is holding you back. And if you do feel frustrated, feeling that your path is blocked, do ask yourself why this might be the case. It might be, for example, that you blame other people, or you blame an organization or an institution or just circumstances. But I would suggest, Aries, that your first port of call is yourself. Ask yourself why you might not want to do something, why you might be frustrating your own progress. I mean, it could be psychological, and there may be a reason why you don't want to progress, why you want to stay where you are. It may be a good reason, it may be a bad reason. Perhaps your unconscious is warning you, do not proceed. You might want to proceed, but it's a bad idea. But sometimes the unconscious dwells in the past. It just wants to stay safe, and you yourself, you're ready to move forward, but you may be sabotaging yourself. And this Mars-Saturn square, it's not exact for a few more days, so it's not of immediate concern. But I mean, it's not of concern at all. By the way, it's something that can be utilized, and I'll be talking about its utility in a few days' time. But the Moon is picking up on this Mars-Saturn square, and so Moon is opposition Mars, Moon is square Saturn. So one interpretation of Moon opposition Mars, Aries, is for you to be angry, to express your anger, at least in a verbal sense. So if something's not going your way, you want to let everyone know. This is, something needs to happen, something needs to change. And I would suggest that you're cautious about this. Don't assume that you've got the answers. Don't think that you know the causation of something, because you don't necessarily, and you might jump to the conclusion, you might look for an external causation, when the real causation might be just something about yourself. So if your path is blocked, do look to yourself first to see if you can find a solution. Only as a sort of a last resort do you start to place blame on other people or things that are external. And in the process, Aries, we do have a T square involving the Moon and Mars and Saturn, and Moon opposition Mars has then Saturn on a T, and Saturn points away towards a solution, and I do think the solution is on a psychological level. And if you can think things through and just get a broader perspective on things, sure, the first impulse is to look at what's going on outside you, but you do address yourself to your psychology, and there's nothing wrong with your psychology, and it's just that you need to perhaps look at the past, think about how the past might be influencing you, and might be influencing not just your decisions, but also your cognitions. You might perceive something in a negative way because that's how it seemed to be in the past. But we're not talking about the past anymore. Ideally, we should be looking to the future. And while you're at it, Aries, I think that it is important for you to treat other people as well as possible. I've just already suggested that there may be a temptation to blame other people for what's going wrong, or what appears to be going wrong. I mean, nothing's really going wrong, but just maybe things aren't quite moving fast enough for you. And if you make a special effort to be friendly, to get on with everyone, I think that your efforts will be rewarded. And in fact, it's quite possible. But if you feel that nothing is happening, but you are ready to talk to people, engage with them, be friendly, then something might shift. And through a positive approach, at least externally, I mean, you might privately be quite negative about everything, but through a positive approach, you can slowly get things to move, and that might be a way in which some of the frustration can be unblocked. I mean, I'm not saying, by the way, it has to be a frustrating day. I mean, part of what I do is I look at things in the worst possible light. I mean, I'm looking at all the symbolism. I can't avoid the fact that Mars is square Saturn and the Moon is involved with it. But there are positive ways to look at Mars square Saturn, and I'll be looking at that in a video pretty soon. Taurus, you may find it quite difficult to avoid the financial aspect of things. I mean, you're a Taurus. I mean, you can't completely ignore money. You've got to make sure that your finances are in good condition. That everything is settled. And we've just had a full moon. In fact, if you're in Australia and New Zealand, that the full moon is very much with you. Today there is a full moon, but I think all of us can feel a full moon because the moon is in Gemini and it's opposition the sun. I mean, at least it's in signs which are opposite one another. And so Taurus, it's going to be quite difficult to avoid money. I mean, you have to start. You will start thinking about it, and perhaps what you're trying to do, Taurus, is to understand. It's easy to make money complicated. That's what people try to do. That's what institutions try to do. This is over your head. There may be aspects of your own finances that you don't want to touch because it seems complicated. You just don't want to involve yourself with it. But with the moon in Gemini, I think that you may be in a good position to be asking questions. And it may not be necessarily easy. The moon is opposition Mars, the moon is square Saturn. And of course the moon does have a special relationship to Taurus because it doesn't rule Taurus, but it is exalted in Taurus. And so if you like, bite the bullet, ask questions that need to be asked, not be put off by something that is confusing, then I think, Taurus, you will start to understand the way things work. And I think that you can have some very useful insights about your finances, and you may want to an extent adjust some aspects of your financial strategy. I'm not giving any financial advice here. Or you might just have an understanding, and I think that understanding is something to strive for. But it's not just about money. I think, Taurus, it's about making things as simple as possible. It does appear that right now someone or somebody is just trying to make things complicated, whatever it is. And if things are complicated, you might be tempted to run away from it. But what is complicated, or what appears to be complicated, could actually be very simple. And it may be a question of asking the right question. I mean, it could be just your simple question, which seems very basic and unsophisticated, might be the thing that changes everything. I mean, it could almost be like the emperor and his new clothes. How does the fairy story go that the emperor is conned into believing that his non-existent clothes are wonderful, and when in fact he's completely naked, and it's a small boy that notices that he's not wearing anything. And maybe it's a bit like that. Maybe there could be a moment today where you understand something that is completely obvious no one else gets it, or perhaps people just people are being too sophisticated for their own good. They don't ask that basic question, but you ask that basic question, and you're right. So Taurus, you might think that you're naive and you're perhaps unsophisticated, that your analysis just doesn't have the depth that other people's analyses have. But no, I think that if you start to believe something, if something starts to become obvious to you, then I think you probably got it right. And if you ask just a very simple question, it might become clear to everyone. Gemini. Moon is still in Gemini for most of the day if you're in the Americas. If you're not in the Americas, then it's in Gemini for all of the day. And so that means that it's still very much a full moon kind of day. I mean, I know we had a full moon yesterday on Thursday, but the full moon is still very much with us. And so you're feeling some of the tension of that full moon. Things are not entirely, they weren't entirely clear, but now they're becoming clear. And when we start to see the truth, it can be quite disturbing. We realize that something has to change. Well, hopefully we realize that something has to change, although sometimes when we see the truth, we decide to look the other way and just pretend we haven't seen it. And that is not advisable. It really isn't. And so this full moon, develops into an opposition between the moon and Mars, and so that Moon-Mars opposition is right across the main axis of your solar chart. And so Moon-Mars opposition, that might say something about relationships. Could be about a clash, a disagreement. Even if a disagreement is not overt, it may be just something you experience. You may look at some of the people who are around you, and you may think that there is a fundamental incompatibility, or just maybe there are certain subjects which you just cannot agree on, and they may be very important subjects. And the moon is not just opposition Mars, but it's all part of a T square. So we've got moon opposition Mars with Saturn on a T, Saturn in Pisces. And Saturn may point to a resolution. So if there is tension, people not agreeing with one another, then you have to think, well, what's the best way to deal with it? Well, perhaps the problem is no one's got a purpose. So if no one has a purpose and people are just disagreeing with one another for the sake of it, well, where is that exactly going? I mean, that all seems, rather useless. But Saturn is talking about a purpose. Ask yourself, what are you trying to achieve? What is everyone else trying to achieve? And why might you be disagreeing? Why might you be feeling tense? And if you can see it like that, then there might be a dynamic resolution here. To think about, how to get from A to B, how you can achieve your ambitions, how everyone else can achieve their ambitions. And if you can cast things in that light, maybe that's perhaps a point of argument, how you argue your case. You don't just focus on the details of a misunderstanding. You focus on why, what's it all about, and where are you all going. And if you can do that, I think that might kind of resolve the issue, and might allow everyone to be moving in the same direction when the immediate impulse is to move in different directions. And this Moon-Mars opposition that we have, okay, 'cause it's a full moon if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but whatever it is, it does focus on relationships. And I think that even though there might be a resolution, I also think that you're perhaps quite aware of the differences between you and other people. And where there's a difference, well, differences can be very useful. They can create a sort of a balanced approach where all views are taken into account, but also where there's a difference, there's a potential for an argument. And so if you're within a relationship, then be a bit careful. If there has been any recent arguments or disagreements, then that Moon-Mars opposition might bring them to the surface. Though, if you are involved or might be involved in any kind of dispute, maybe you should trust yourself to have your own influence. You can be quite powerful when you want to be. You can assert your willpower. And your willpower is quite something right now, and so do make the most of it. And if you believe something can happen, if you think that something can happen, something good can happen, if you really think that, and you stick with it, then I think that you can get the results that you are looking for. Cancer. Cancerians can be quite sort of influenced by the lunar cycle. I mean, after all, the moon is your ruler, and the moon is in Gemini for most of the day, well, all of the day if you're not in the Americas, and so we do have to look very carefully at the moon and what the moon is doing. And the moon is making an opposition to Mars, and it's making a square to Saturn. And because of those aspects, there may be times during a day when you do feel quite frustrated. You feel that things just aren't necessarily going your way, and maybe that everything has to be fought for. And that could be tough, because I don't think that you're really able to fully assert yourself at the moment. I think that part of you would like to just keep a low profile, keep out of trouble, not draw attention to yourself, and possibly that's the right approach. So if you see trouble coming, and Cancerians are very good at seeing trouble coming. Cancerians can have a very cautious approach, and they can be quite wise in that way. And so you can see how things might go wrong, and you can perhaps see a disagreement or an argument a mile off, and then you might be able to sidestep the issue. And so just because there is a potential for stress and argument and tension and disagreement just doesn't mean it has to happen. And it may just be, Cancer, that you just have to keep a low profile. And as far as relationships are concerned, the moon is making a square to Saturn, it's making an opposition to Mars. So relationships, even if they're quite close relationships, even if relationships had gone well in the recent past, that doesn't mean to say that everything is fine. And it might be a case of where there is a disagreement, where there is a potential for disagreement, that disagreement could come out into the open. So if you are spending a lot of time with another person, then it might be a good idea to be careful and try to avoid controversy. Well, unless you want controversy. I mean, if you absolutely insist that you have to have it out with someone, you have to argue your case, then you could, but I don't think I'd necessarily advise it. Now, if you are in the Americas, then this evening, maybe even late afternoon if you're in California or Alaska or Hawaii, even earlier in the afternoon. But if you're in the Americas, at the end of the day, the moon does move into Cancer, moves into your sign. And so there could then be a big change. Something could really shift, and this will be a time when the immediate impact of a full moon will be over, and perhaps there'll be a sense of things getting back to normal and you being able to be yourself more, being more comfortable and not having to be quite so cautious, because with a moon in Cancer you will feel sort of back in control. Now if you're not in the Americas, don't worry, the moon will move into Cancer tomorrow on Saturday. Leo. Right now, Leo, you are still, feeling, I hope, pretty good about yourself. I mean, you can feel good about yourself, and you can feel good about how you present yourself, how you maybe present yourself in public, and the fact that you are at the moment, I would have said, relatively charismatic. People regard you as being something special. There is something special about you, and you can get people's attention, and at the same time you're going to want to make the most of everything you come across. I think sort of yesterday I was talking about your capacity for self-improvement, and I think that capacity for self-improvement is still there. So if you want things to be better, Leo, then I think you can certainly make the right moves, and so that's something to make the most of. Though you do have to be a little careful when it comes to other people. I mean, everyone has to be careful to an extent, because today the moon is square Saturn and the moon is opposition Mars, and so with that aspect, if you are, for example, socializing over the course of the day, if you're spending a lot of time in other people's company, then there could be a few issues. You should not, Leo, take agreement, you should not take agreement for granted. And while it's true that right now you are quite charming and charismatic, that doesn't mean that charm and charisma can get you everywhere. There could be moments today, Leo, when you're just aware that there are some rather fundamental disagreements between maybe you and your friends and your associates, not necessarily so much to do with in one-to-one relationships, but when you're with other people, that's when the tension levels might rise. And it may not be that you have a particular issue, maybe other people have an issue, maybe just the whole process of socializing is more complicated than it should be. And maybe, Leo, you're having some realizations about other people and what they're like, and perhaps what their motivations are, and you're perhaps thinking also about what's right for yourself, what you want to achieve, and you can achieve you can achieve quite a lot, but in many cases you'll achieve the most when you're on your own, or at least doing the things that you want to do. What you absolutely should not be doing is doing something on another person's behalf. Someone wants you to do something, okay, you can do something small, but you don't want to spend huge amounts of time doing something that is fundamentally alien to yourself. You don't really want to alienate yourself. You want to be in accord with who you are, your character, your destiny, and also what you feel good about. And if you feel good about something, then that is very much the way forward. Virgo. The moon is still in Gemini, and the moon is just recovering from a full moon, because yesterday, or perhaps earlier today, we had the moon opposition Sun, the full moon, and the moon is making an opposition to Mars. And so the fact that the moon is opposition to Sun and is opposition to Mars may say something about your own feelings of maybe frustration, because Saturn is involved here. The moon is making a square to Saturn, and so, Virgo, it may be a time when you're feeling quite ambitious. There are certainly things you want to get going on, and you want to get going on things as quickly as possible, but at the same time you're just aware that there might be things going on that are holding you back. It could be, for example, that your home and your family, there are things going on at home which you have to pay attention to, you have to address, and it's not something you want to do, but you have to do it, and that might feel that it's slowing you down, is taking away some of your power. And also with Moon square Saturn, your first impulse might be to think that people are not sympathetic, or that you have to spend so much time worrying about other people's problems that you can't think about what's important for yourself. So Virgo, it is easy, I think, to be quite negative about what's happening today. So that negativity is pretty clear, and the question is, how far do you take that negativity? And it's easy to get angry and frustrated and annoyed. Moon opposition Mars, Moon opposition the Sun, but the answer might well be the very thing that you regard as being a problem. The answer may actually be another person. You might have a negative view of other people. You might regard them as being a threat, or if not a threat, then they're just a waste of time. They're not really considering your own interests. But there are people around who can really help you. They can be the key to the lock. That's because we've got Saturn on the T of the T square. And Saturn does represent another person, represents a person who you might regard as being a problem, but they're not actually a problem at all. And you may find, Virgo, that just by being open-minded and by giving people a chance, even if you don't want to give people a chance, you might find that actually that is the right approach, and that's the key to everything. And you shouldn't feel that you're risking anything or much if you give other people a chance, because fundamentally you're still in control. You really are. I think you're enjoying the fact that Mercury is now stationary direct. Mercury is making a trine to Jupiter. Mercury is making a trine to Saturn. We've got this grand trine between Mercury, your ruler, and Jupiter and Saturn coming together, and that makes you powerful. And so you are able to influence things, and perhaps the best way to influence things is to make an effort, to really make an effort to be with people and to understand them, and that might very much be the way forward for you. So don't be too negative, and it is very important, I think, that you do give people a chance. Libra, the moon is still in Gemini, and the moon in Gemini is it's a good place for the moon to be in from a Libran perspective, and it's about you perhaps being able to see what is available. I mean, that's what you want to do. I mean, that's the approach you're trying to cultivate. The question is, are you able to fully get away with it? Just because you're feeling adventurous, you want to see what is around you, you want to see what is available, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to see it through. And one reason you might not be able to see it through is because of just external, disruption, having to deal with whatever it is that other people are involved with, what people are doing, and what other people are doing could very well have an impact on you, and it may well be pretty frustrating. You have it all planned, and then you've got to consider something else. Now, it might be other people causing a problem. I mean, the moon is opposition Mars. Mars is ruler of Aries, your opposite sign. So Mars can very well represent other people and what other people are up to, and they could be disruptive. But it could also be how you respond to the facts. If you want to do something, you have to think about what is possible. You have to ask questions. You have to do some research, and it might well be that the facts don't necessarily support your ambitions or your ideas. But yeah, I mean, ideas and facts. We can have big ideas, but sometimes the facts contradict it. And what do you do? How do you get around that? And one approach is to be very focused, very detailed about the whole thing. Really try to take a nuts and bolts approach. Trying to understand things at a very sort of basic level, and to see what might be possible, what might not be possible, and then to sort of organize things around it. And so, with that approach, I think that you can find a sort of a measure of satisfaction. So just if you do find that things are frustrating, that you just can't move things as quickly as you would like, don't panic. And I know it's boring to have to focus on the details of a matter, but sometimes it really is necessary. And so with discipline, you can actually get where you want to go to. And also, Libra, you have a side to yourself that wants to be different. And maybe if you can give yourself the element of surprise, or rather you can be surprising to other people. You can surprise them with what you do, with what you say, with what you express. And if you can do that, Libra, that may be a very good way of moving things forward. Presenting a bit of a shock. You create a shock situation, something that people weren't expecting. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to respond. And that may be a good way of making the most of the situation and perhaps taking advantage of other people's confusion. Scorpio, things might well be a little bit complicated. You can't expect everything to be entirely straightforward. I mean, absolutely not. Some things are difficult, and they have to be worked through. And part of the problem is that we've got an opposition aspect between the Moon and Mars. So Mars is, of course, your ruler, and Scorpio, you might like things to be simple. I mean, not entirely simple. I mean, every Scorpio understands that things are complicated, and to an extent, but still, you'd like to have times where things can be straightforward. And Scorpio, that things simply aren't straightforward, and that extra effort is required. And so you can't really take things at face value. Yeah, it'd be great if you could, but I don't think that you can. And so by considering things from every angle, and by sort of using your emotions to really understand what is happening, then Scorpio, you can start to make real progress. And it's not necessarily something you have to do on your own. At the moment, Scorpio, I think actually your social abilities are pretty good. I think you can get on with people, even if you feel wary about them, if you're not entirely trusting. Everyone is complicated. They might try to make it simple, try to give the impression that they've got straightforward personalities, but that's never the case. But still, you can work with other people, and you're capable of being friendly and quite sort of warm, and you even have a bit of charm. And at the same time, Scorpio, you can perhaps benefit from the fact that we've got this growing influence of a grand trine in water signs. Mercury is still in Scorpio. It's getting to be late Scorpio, but it's Mercury is making trine to Jupiter, making a trine to Saturn. We've got this grand trine, and this gives you energy, emotional energy, and you have the capacity, Scorpio, to really, get things to move and to flow. And so I think that that is something that you can very much work with. So at first, Scorpio, things might seem difficult and complicated. I mean, you'd like things to be simple, but you know that they're not. But if you work with things and if you work with other people, then I think that in the end, things will start to move. And whatever it is that you're trying to develop, you're trying to work with, I think that you'll in the end get the hang of it, and you'll be able to deal with today's challenges, whatever those challenges might be. And at the same time, even if you think people are being deceptive or are being difficult, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to respond in an angry way. I mean, you could, because the moon is opposition Mars. Moon opposition Mars is an angry aspect, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you have to sort of manifest it. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, we've obviously still got the Sun in Sagittarius, as well as Venus and Mars. And with these Sagittarius planets, we've got the moon in the opposite sign. And I talked about that yesterday, because yesterday, or perhaps even early today, we had a full moon in Gemini, and this full moon in Gemini, might very well say something about relationships, how you get on with other people, whether you disagree with them. And with moon opposition Mars, it's possible that some relationships don't necessarily work out. Some people are annoying. I mean, that's the way it is. But if you find someone annoying, does that necessarily mean that you should immediately respond? I mean, Sagittarians, do like to be open and honest, but that might not necessarily always be the right thing to do. Should you repress your feelings? No, I don't think you should. I mean, you might. I mean, the moon in Gemini, in your opposite sign, opposition Mars, square Saturn, that is quite a frustrated feeling there, and just a feeling that you can't express everything. But what you have to do, Sagittarius, is perhaps ask yourself, what is important? The moon might be opposition Mars, but Saturn is part of a T-square, and Saturn perhaps is the answer. And Saturn in Pisces is in Pisces. It's relatively close to the North Node. That is the way forward. And so if things are complicated, if things are difficult, if there's anger flying around, then your job is very much to ground things and to ask yourself, what is important? That is a really key question. And so, Sagittarius, if you can answer that question and work out, what really, really matters, there are a lot of things to worry about, or potentially to worry about, a lot of things to get obsessed about. But if you can think about the fundamentals of the situation, then I think that is the right approach. And in a sort of a mundane sense, I would have said probably today, the more time you spend at home, or just somewhere where you feel comfortable and relaxed and safe, the better. Because if you go to places you've never been to before, where you don't feel comfortable, where you're not in control, well, then maybe you're just increasing the chances of some kind of outburst, and you don't want things to be more angry than they have to be. So do try to keep it simple. Try to work out what's important, and if you can spend most of the day, even all the day, somewhere where you feel happy and comfortable, well, that I think would be the right approach. Capricorn. Mars is starting to make a square to Saturn. That's an important aspect, and so this Mars square Saturn, well, of course, it's likely to impact you, because Saturn is your ruler, and Mars aspect squaring Saturn, it can be an irritant, something just there to annoy you. It happens, and over the next, I don't know, over the next, over the next sort of week or two, there are all sorts of sort of Mars-Saturn issues cropping up, and so with Mars squaring Saturn, you shouldn't allow yourself to get annoyed. I mean, you could. It may but just be that you can't do things as quickly as you'd like, and you might then feel that you have to maybe retreat. I mean, that's one approach. If you're feeling annoyed, you might then think that you want to stay clear of the annoyance. I mean, that is a sort of sensible Capricorn approach. And as far as the sort of details of the annoyance, well, with Moon opposition Mars, I mean, it may not just be about you. I mean, okay, we've got Mars square Saturn in general, but as far as today is concerned, we've got the Moon joining in with that Mars-Saturn square. So Moon is opposition Mars and square Saturn. So what I'm kind of saying is that this Mars-Saturn square has been creeping up on you, and it's getting closer and closer, but you haven't necessarily been aware of it. But the Moon, because it aspects this Mars-Saturn square, it manifests this as well. And so this might be the first time when it really hits you. And so, what's the right approach? Well, I think the right approach is to say what's on your mind, to talk about what's bothering you. The moment you become aware of it, it's very important not to allow things to build up. Your anger could build up. You could just allow things to reach a point where you just have to respond, but just talk about things as much as possible. Tell everyone what's on your mind. If something's uncertain, ask for clarification. Ask someone what they mean. And by constantly encouraging people to think and talk and explain, I think that might go a long way towards diffusing the situation. And, on a positive note, maybe we're talking about a situation where you are not directly involved. Other people may be tense. Other people may not be on good form because of their frustration, but you can intervene. You getting people to clarify. You can even be a mediator. That is actually quite possible. And the question is, do you have to be invited to be a mediator? I don't think you have to be. Just get people to clarify, get people to talk. You can do it. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it would certainly be a way forward. And overall, Capricorn, you're going to be very good at starting conversations, introducing new material, and perhaps even forcing people to talk about things they don't necessarily want to talk about. Aquarius. It's good, of course, that the Moon is in an air sign, and with the Moon in Gemini, Aquarius, it is a time when you can certainly be very, very creative. I think that you're on good form, and there's something quite dynamic about this creativity. And because the Moon is making an opposition to Mars, it's making a square to Saturn. Now, if you've been reading, if you've been watching, listening to some of my other forecasts of the 12 signs, you might have noticed that I've overall been quite negative about the Moon opposition Saturn. But it may be that it can work in your favor. And so, if we think about what's happening, the moon is opposition Mars, so that's dynamic. It's exciting. There are things going on. There are things to think about, and particularly with the moon in Gemini, it's about your creativity and what you can create, what you can bring to the table. And it is dynamic, but of course, where you've got dynamism, you've got the potential for argument, and not everyone gets on with each other, and perhaps you have a chance to use use whatever's going on, because if things are exciting and there is uncertainty as well, then this might be a situation that you can very much use and develop, and even perhaps profit from. I mean, maybe literally profit from. So when you see when you feel the tension rising, obviously the immediate response is to back off. But perhaps you can deal with the tension. Perhaps you can deal with difficult situations. And if you can deal with a difficult situation, then maybe you can actually profit from it. I mean, okay, it might be financially profit, but there may be other ways in which you can profit. And also, Aquarius, you're very good at the moment communicating. You can speak with power and conviction, and you can get people's attention. And so if there is a difficult situation, people are unsure of themselves, all it takes is for you to sort of ever so slightly raise your voice and to express your opinion. And that could change everything. Pisces. Pisces, we have a rather difficult aspect between the moon and Mars. So we've just had a full moon, and now we have got moon opposition Mars, and so we've still got the full moon. And so in an ideal world, Pisces, probably you would just do things your way. You wouldn't feel that you had to particularly do anything, and perhaps you might want to sort of stay away from trouble. That I think is your immediate impulse, because it might seem that you're putting yourself at risk, or you're putting yourself in a difficult situation, and that might not be what you want. But some things cannot be avoided, and with moon opposition Mars, this aspect might say something about your work. If you're going into work today, if you have a job, or if you're looking for a job, that whole area is just an area of agitation, and another good reason to steer clear of it. I mean, it's a Friday. Maybe you want to end the week early. That might be your immediate impulse, but I don't think that's necessarily the right impulse. Remember, with 3 planets in Sagittarius, Sun, Venus, and Mars, that does suggest to me that you can really project yourself very well. Even if you don't feel comfortable projecting yourself, you'd perhaps rather be somewhere else. Now, we've got a Moon-Mars opposition, as I've said, but we've also got Saturn on the T. So, in other words, we've got Saturn making a T-square, and Saturn is in your sign. And this suggests to me, Pisces, that you can very much take control of the situation, because Saturn is the key to everything here. It's not just the fact that Saturn is on the T of moon opposition Mars. It's also the fact that Saturn is involved in a T-square involving Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn. So you've got Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn are in a trine relationship. So there's a lot of action, a lot of energy there, and so Saturn can help bring things together and provide structure, provide discipline, and I think that is something you can do. So with Pisces, if you look at a textbook, Pisceans are supposed to be like the ocean. They can be chaotic, and they can move from one place to another and so forth. But I think that textbook description of a Pisces, certainly at the moment, is not entirely accurate, at least with Saturn in your sign. And so Saturn is about you really being able to take control and taking a situation that seems problematic. It's not about your chaos, it's about other people's chaos, and you can really structure it and do things your way, and don't be afraid of being tough. You can put people in their place, not through angry words, but through words that are carefully thought out, that you've structured these words. You you tell people the truth as you see it, and that I think is the way to deal with an overall situation that might be slightly complicated. But I think that you can through the power of your personality and also your sense of self-discipline, you can really bring things down to earth. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I'm making it so far. My computer is about to die, as you can hear. I think this is I'm really hoping this is my computer's last mission, the last time I used this computer to make these videos. I've got another computer almost ready. And so now it's time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 10, which is treading. And treading, represents a situation where we do have to be careful. We're dealing with something which is difficult, which has to be negotiated. And the problem is here, treading. We might tread on the tiger's tail. So if we tread on the tiger's tail, we can get ourselves into trouble because the tiger might bite us. But it's a fairly tolerant tiger. We can get close to it. We can walk round the tiger. So if we don't do anything stupid, we'll be able to get round it. But we just do have to be careful. And the tiger is probably pretty aware of us, but it doesn't really want to bite us unless we really take things too far. And so that may say something about what the day is like. And this hexagram treading doesn't move. There are no moving lines. So that might indicate that today, Friday, is not necessarily particularly active. There's nothing necessarily going on. There's no real moving from one thing to another. And so that's perhaps what it's about, just making slow progress, certainly not being in a hurry. We're not going to achieve everything today. We might have big ideas Friday, end of the week. We're going to get things done. I know that we've got moon opposition Mars, moon square Saturn, and that might seem potentially dramatic, but yeah, that moon opposition Mars square Saturn might indicate trouble, but it doesn't have to be that way. And we just have to sort of focus on, what we know and trust, because the nuclear hexagram of treading, if we knock out the top and bottom lines, the nuclear hexagram of treading is hexagram 37, the family. And the family represents obviously a hierarchy. It's the foundations of the Confucian way of looking at the world. Society is based on the family. People have their roles. Mother, father, number one son, number two son, number one daughter, number two daughter, however it is. And so if everyone knows their roles, then everything is going to be fine. And so that may say something about treading and this hexagram. There's a ever so slightly dangerous situation here. We could make a mistake, but if we keep in mind our role and we don't go beyond that role, then I think that we're going to be okay. And finally, I want to talk about this T-square, or not T-square, it's well, there is a T-square. I want to talk about Moon and Mars and Saturn. And Mars and Saturn is about frustration and things going wrong, and it's kind of very appropriate. So if you've been watching all of this video, you'll know that my computer is about to blow up. Yeah, I hope you'll get to see this video. You may not, but my computer is dying, and with my computer dying, I think that this says something about Mars and Saturn. It's kind of descriptive of Mars and Saturn. So let me show you what's going on here. We do have Mars starting to make a square to Saturn, and it is frustrating, and it can be about things breaking and just being annoyed. Okay, we could go talk about death. Maybe Mars square Saturn is about the death of my computer. And now that the moon, we've just had a full moon, I've got this full moon. I'm a Gemini. I've got a Gemini full moon. Might be my computer breaking. Is my computer breaking? And Hopefully I'll have a new computer. My new computer will be operational the next time I make a video. But anyway, that's my own problems. But right now with Moon opposition Mars, Saturn, the point is that the Moon is picking up on this Mars-Saturn square. This Mars-Saturn square is going to happen very soon. I mean, let me just tell you when exactly the Mars-Saturn square is, because that's what it is all about. So it looks as if that is going to be beginning of next week, sort of Monday, Tuesday. We've got Mars. The Mars-Saturn square, it's on the sort of 8th or 9th, Monday or Tuesday, the 8th or the 9th, we've got that Mars-Saturn square. And that is a tough aspect. And with the Moon making the opposition Mars to Mars and the square to Saturn, it's just reminding us that it's upon us. And this could be a difficult time. I mean, the Mars square Saturn could be difficult for the world. You can associate that with death and destruction. And so we need to start preparing for it. But, on an individual level, it's probably not going to be such a big deal. I mean, as individuals, we have more freedom from politicians and countries and organizations, so it may not affect us, and perhaps we can just watch what happens, although we are part of it from a collective viewpoint. And, one midpoint we do have is, you see, if you've got the Mars-Saturn square, the Moon is sesquiquadrate the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so that's telling us something about the condition of the Moon. Now, I know that the Moon is going to only be on the sesquiquadrate of Mars-Saturn midpoint for a few hours, but I thought it'd be a good opportunity to talk about the Moon, what it means for the Moon to be aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And I just wanted to look at a few people who have the Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and also perhaps a couple of events as well. So if you're interested in the British royal family, I mean, I'm not particularly interested in them, but Camilla, King Charles's wife, she has Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So there's her Moon, and you see Camilla has a conjunction between the Moon and Venus, and there's Mars, there's Saturn, and you can see that Moon-Venus conjunction is right on her Mars-Saturn midpoint. Now that Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, this may say something about her and what kind of person she is, and she may have a somewhat sort of fatalistic view of everything. And I mean, I know her husband has been ill recently. We don't know how ill. I mean, the popular popular press, or certainly some YouTube videos, are always saying that King Charles is on the verge of dying. But I mean, people can say what they like, can't they? And so I don't know. I don't really know about her personality, but of course you could say that if you're one of those people that don't really like Camilla, I mean, she's quite a divisive person in her own way, but she has in her own way been quite destructive. For example, in terms of a relationship between Charles and Diana, and probably would, I'm sure that I think it's likely the marriage would have fallen apart anyway between Charles and Diana, but that could be the destructive role she might have played. I mean, it's not really her fault, perhaps, or is it Charles's fault? But anyway, she does have Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and the Moon, it's a female planet. It represents her, and I think it does say a great deal about who she is. The fact that she's got the fact that she's got Moon and Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. There is something tough and disruptive, and there may be this association with death. I mean, okay, you had that with Diana. I mean, she wasn't directly related to Diana, but then, of course, she's got her husband who is sick, and so maybe we're seeing something of that there. And someone who really doesn't need any introduction is Jeffrey Epstein. So Jeffrey Epstein has Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. assuming this is really his time of birth, 6:15 a.m. Now, after his birthday book came out, we find out that Jeffrey Epstein has Moon making a square to his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So there's Mars and there's Saturn. So his Mars-Saturn midpoint is at around 7 degrees. His Mars-Saturn midpoint is at around 7 degrees Capricorn. So he's got Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. I mean, the Moon is about emotional responses. And of course, in the end, he died, whether he was murdered or committed suicide, he died under difficult circumstances. And the Moon may also say something about women. I mean, the Moon is projectable. His attitude to women, and it may say something psychologically about his sexuality and what he was doing, the way he just couldn't help himself. It appears with the way he misused these young women, effectively children. I mean, I'm not going to sort of go into too much detail about it, because you probably know more about it than me. But that just says something about the Moon at squaring a Mars-Saturn midpoint. In this case, there's something about it that is just strange and weird. And as far as, when we're talking about the Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, it's always a good idea to look at what Reinhold Ebertin said. I should have done that before. So if you look at what Reinhold Ebertin says about Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, he says, weakness of will, a mood or fit of depression, lack of courage, illness, separation or death of members of the female sex. I mean, I don't know if that's entirely the case. I mean, I know that, for example, Virginia Giuffre, she recently died, and if she hadn't got involved with Epstein, this wouldn't have happened. But so there is something about him and his attitude to the feminine and how he treats the feminine, which seems to be linked with the fact that he has got Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Now, Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint can also be just a relationship with death. And Timothy McVeigh, who was responsible for the Oklahoma bombing in 1996, remember, he was very upset about the Waco raid when the government agents went onto the Waco compound and people were killed, and he got very upset about it. He was upset about the government, and so he felt he had to blow up some government office, and he planted this huge bomb in Oklahoma that killed, I don't know, it killed over 100 people. It was a massive explosion. But anyway, he died in the federal death row, and so he had Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so you could just say, well, Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, there's Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. I think his Mars-Saturn midpoint is around 3 degrees Taurus. So in this case, if you look at his Mars and Saturn, that means that he let's have a look at his midpoint. So you see, Timothy McVeigh had the Sun exactly on his Mars-Saturn midpoint. He had the Moon making a semi-square to his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So his Mars-Saturn midpoint, we're having both the Sun and the Moon aspecting a Mars-Saturn midpoint. I mean, that is really powerful. Mars-Saturn killing a lot of people and oneself being executed. I mean, you don't really have to say any more about it. And final person that I want to look at is Aretha Franklin. So Aretha Franklin, her Moon is really interesting. because obviously she was a very famous and talented singer. As you know from my videos, I don't really spend a lot of time on the horoscopes of singers usually. But I do find her horoscope interesting because her moon is so powerful. She's got moon in Cancer on the ninth house cusp. It's in its own sign. It's the moon is it's a nighttime chart. The moon is works well during night. It's a nocturnal planet. It's a feminine planet. It's in a feminine sign. It's above the horizon at night. So it's a great moon. And so people with good moons obviously are very good at reaching out to the public. And so if you want to be a singer or a star, having a moon in this kind of position is just really good. But her moon is making a semi-square to her Mars-Saturn midpoint. So you can see there is her Mars-Saturn midpoint, moon making a semi-square to it. So not all is as good as it seems. And, we do know that she had really quite a difficult life. I think that she got pregnant, I think, at the age of 12. She had her second child at the age of 15. I think her father got shot. Her mother died of breast cancer before she was 10 years old. So you might see that moon as being, the moon represents her. I mean, in a female chart, that's her, the moon, and it's on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so the difficulty and the death and perhaps the abuse that she experienced through her life really coloured things. So perhaps this is an example of, you see a good moon, and this certainly is a great moon, which must have had, it's a great moon in a traditional sense. It must have really helped her be successful. But by looking at the midpoints, you just see something else. You see sort of an extra sort of subtlety. And now I want to just turn to a few events with moon on the aspecting a Mars-Saturn midpoint. So I was recently talking about Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party. And so this is a time when she became leader. And I didn't really look at this chart, but she became leader when the moon was in a somewhat difficult position. The moon was in Scorpio, fallen. Obviously, the moon is exalted in Taurus, so it's fallen in Scorpio. So there's a problem moon from that angle. And additionally, the moon is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. The moon is also in mutual reception to Mars. The moon is in the sign of Mars. Mars is in the sign of the moon. And so having a moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, opposition to Mars-Saturn midpoint, that suggests it's tough being leader. And it's tough being leader, and it may not be especially successful. That is one view. And certainly up until a few months ago, her leadership of the Conservative Party was seen to be really disastrous. People were just counting the days until she was forced out. But recently, she's had some good performances in the dispatch box recently with the budget, destroying Rachel Reeves in a way that was thought to be very, very impressive. And so that may say something about moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. There is something hostile about moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Perhaps that's what people are looking for. So I don't think that moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint is necessarily going to condemn her leadership to failure, but it certainly makes it tough. Everything has to be really tough. Maybe she's a Capricorn. Maybe she can handle it. Now, while I'm on the subject of Kemi Badenoch, I recently showed you a horary chart asking the question, will she become Conservative Prime Minister? Will she become Prime Minister by January the 1st, 2030? And I said that the answer was probably no. And I want to revisit that chart, because the thing about this program, this astrology program, I looked at here's the horary that I used. So the thing about this program is that it's set for where I am, which is Lakewood, Washington. And the thing is that the atlas on this program is its coordinates for Lakewood, Washington are not exactly accurate. So using the atlas on this program, I was getting an ascendant of 3 degrees and something Cancer, and I was saying it was a bit early, but I plugged in the exact coordinates of where I am, and the ascendant turns out to be 2 degrees, 2 degrees and 3 minutes Cancer. Now, I did set up this chart a year ago, and I was perhaps a bit lazy. I just took the coordinates from the program and I got 3 degrees Cancer. But now I've manually entered in the true coordinates, and I find the ascendant at 2 degrees Cancer. Now, 3 degrees Cancer is I regard as a broad cutoff. If the ascendant on a horary chart is less than 3 degrees, then you can't judge the question. So in terms of what I said about will Kemi Badenoch be Prime Minister by January the 1st, 2030, I am going to change my judgment on that. Rather than say I don't think so, I'm saying this chart cannot be judged. It can't be judged because the ascendant is too early. So when we're talking about Kemi Badenoch becoming leader of the Conservative Party, the focus is on the moon. The moon is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. This, you could say, this is a woman who has a really tough job and is going to be under a lot of pressure. There might be questions about whether she can see it through, although maybe the moon in mutual reception to Mars is going to save things. But you can look at an example of the moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, which literally is about the death of a woman. And here is the horoscope for the assassination of Indira Gandhi, which is in 1984. I find this chart interesting, not just interesting. I kind of feel this personal connection to it because I've led a fairly boring life, and I'm never caught up in anything. I'm not. You read about things in the news and you're never impacted in it. But the assassination, I was in Nepal when she was assassinated, and the day after she was assassinated, I took a flight from Kathmandu to Patna, and I saw the impact of her assassination. I was there the day after, and it was it was really devastating. And seeing an Indian mob on the street, these people on the street, 24-hour curfew, seeing shops owned by Sikhs looted. So I kind of feel this. I feel this sort of personal connection with this assassination because, unlike all the other big events, I was kind of there in India when it happened, and so with her assassination, the moon is at 3 degrees Aquarius, and there's Mars and there is Saturn, and the midpoint is approximately 18 degrees Sagittarius. Let me just find the exact midpoint. So the Mars-Saturn midpoint is. Let me just find the Mars-Saturn midpoint for when this happened. If I can see it. Sorry about this. So there's 33. So okay. So there's. So yeah, so the midpoint was at around 1833 Sagittarius. So there's a midpoint. The moon was on the midpoint. So the moon is a female planet, and so it represents a woman, Indira Gandhi, on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and so. That is the death of a woman. I mean, you have to look at other factors in this chart. Venus was rising, so it is about a woman, and what happened to her. I don't want to go into this chart in detail. Perhaps I'll do that perhaps on a later date. I mean, I have looked at the chart in detail before. Maybe I'll look at it again. But so that's another way in which moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint can work: death or assassination of a woman. And going back to Jeffrey Epstein. We just saw how Jeffrey Epstein has the moon square his Mars-Saturn midpoint, and As far as his death is concerned, we don't know exactly when he died, but assuming he died at 4:30 a.m., the moon at the time of his death was there's his Mars, there's his Saturn, so the moon was semi-square his Mars-Saturn midpoint at the time of the moon was probably semi-square his Mars-Saturn midpoint at the time of his death. So it could be that he resonates to moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So he is born with the moon square his Mars-Saturn midpoint, and he dies with the moon semi-square his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So anyway, those are a few thoughts on moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. I think I've made it without my computer breaking. So thank you for bearing with me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.